In the decade between 2012 and 2022, global solar generating capacity increased from 100 gigawatts to 1 terawatt. That's a 900 gigawatt increase in 10 years. Just 2 years later, in 2024, that capacity had doubled to 2 terawatts. Less than 2 years after that, at the start of 2026, the total capacity sailed past the 3 terawatt mark. To give a bit of context to those rather abstract numbers, total global electricity generating capacity at the end of 2023 was just short of 9 terawatts. That's total global capacity from all sources, including fossil fuels. That doesn't mean solar power now provides 30% of all the world's electricity, of course. Solar panels don't work 24/7, do they? But according to this new report from the highly respected industry trade association Solar Power Europe, solar PV does account for 9% of global electricity demand, which is 3 times as much as 5 years ago. So there's a clear trajectory of growth here that on the face of it appears to be very much on the up and up. Solar PV used to be prohibitively expensive, and then China waded in and changed everything for everyone. And now solar panels are so cheap and readily available that everyone is getting involved, even in developing nations where in some cases panels can be bought for less than the cost of a family meal. The trouble is, while the growth in production volumes of the panels themselves has been like almost nothing we've ever seen before, growth in the infrastructure, electricity markets, planning systems, and regulations needed to support all those panels is struggling to keep up. So is the solar power revolution about to hit a very painful brick wall? Hello, and welcome to Just Have a Think. When I first got this new report, I was pretty sure I was going to be reading about another year, another solar record, all backed up with the usual collection of graphs and charts showing how solar was growing faster than anyone predicted. And to be fair, that's exactly what the opening pages deliver. Before we get stuck into all that though, I'm delighted to let you know that I will once again be hosting several discussion panels at the upcoming Everything Electric live show at the Twickenham Allianz Stadium on Friday the 11th and Saturday the 12th of September. This is the first time the Everything Electric live event has come to South West London, so I'm very excited to see what's in store. There'll certainly be all the usual brilliant stuff, like the opportunity to test drive one or more of the myriad new all-electric vehicles now available on the UK market, plus a host of experts on hand to guide you through the process of choosing heat pumps, solar panels, battery energy systems, car chargers, and just about anything else you might be looking for to transform your home as part of the global energy transition. And of course, there'll be plenty of discussion panels about all things electric across both days. A daily ticket costs £10 if you book in advance online, or you can get a 2-day ticket for £15. Plus, if you use my Just Have a Think discount code at the bottom of the screen, you'll get 20% off those prices. What's not to like? So scan the QR code or follow the link at the top of the screen to grab your tickets while they're still available, and I'll hopefully see you there. According to Solar Power Europe, the world installed an extraordinary 664 gigawatts of new solar capacity during 2025. That's another all-time record, representing around 80% of all new renewable generating capacity added globally during that year. Solar has now overtaken wind to become one of the world's biggest sources of electricity, producing around 2,778 terawatt hours of electricity, which equates to that 9% of global demand that I mentioned earlier. That's pretty staggering, don't get me wrong. If you'd suggested 20 years ago that a technology that back then was dismissed by many as hopelessly expensive and hopelessly intermittent would become responsible for nearly 1 kilowatt hour in every 11 generated on the planet, you'd probably have been laughed out of the room. But if you delve a bit further into this analysis, it starts to become clear that this isn't really a report about solar power itself. It's a report about what happens after solar succeeds, which I think by now we can probably agree it has. Because buried among all these celebratory statistics is a bit of a surprising forecast. For the first time in more than 2 decades, Solar Power Europe believes the global solar market will actually shrink next year. I know! Apparently, under its central forecast, annual installations fall from 664 gigawatts to around 612 gigawatts in 2026. That's a decline of roughly 8%. Now, if you're someone who delights in proclaiming that renewable energy has finally hit the buffers, that statistic probably sounds like the moment you've been waiting for, doesn't it? But not so fast, my cynical friend, because if you did go down that route, you'd be making exactly the wrong conclusion. So come on, Dave, make your bloody mind up, I hear you cry. Is it brilliant or rubbish? It can't be both, surely. Well, before we get to that, I just want to give you a bit of info on this little icon and QR code at the bottom of the screen here. Patreon support means I've never had to monetize my content here on YouTube. That means you've never been interrupted by adverts or sponsor messages in any of my videos. Patreon supporters get early access to all my stuff, votes in monthly content polls, exclusive content, and the ability to chat directly with me and other like-minded folks, all for the price of a coffee a month. So if you feel you could support my work in that way, then click on the QR code for more details. Right, so what's going on with this solar paradox then? Well, it's complicated, and as usual, it's mostly about China. Yeah, I know, I keep banging on about China, but just bear with me. We know from previous videos that the People's Republic has become so overwhelmingly dominant in global solar deployment that changes to its domestic policies now distort worldwide statistics. During 2025, developers rushed to complete projects before changes to China's feed-in tariff arrangements came into force. The result was an extraordinary installation boom. Now that those incentives have changed, Chinese installations are expected to fall sharply. And because China alone accounted for around 57% of all new global solar installations last year, that single policy change is enough to drag down the worldwide total, even though most of the rest of the world is still expected to grow. In other words, the projected global slowdown isn't telling us that countries have suddenly gone off solar, it's telling us that China's become so enormous it can move the global market almost single-handedly. And that's where this report gets quite interesting, because once you remove that statistical quirk, you find that the problem's no longer building the solar panels, it's everything else that comes afterwards. For almost 3 decades, the clean energy debate has revolved around one central question. Can we generate enough cheap, renewable electricity? That question drove billions of dollars of investment into research, manufacturing, and deployment. Engineers made panels more efficient, and manufacturers made them dramatically cheaper, to the extent that in most parts of the world today, solar has become the cheapest form of new electricity generation ever deployed. So the technology itself is no longer the bottleneck. Instead, the report repeatedly returns to an entirely different list of problems: grid congestion, insufficient storage, lack of flexibility, planning delays, financing constraints, transmission bottlenecks, and electricity markets that were designed decades ago around large fossil fuel power stations rather than millions of small generators. 20 years ago, large coal stations, gas plants and nuclear reactors generated electricity more or less whenever you asked them. Demand rose in the morning as people got up, peaked in the early evening when everyone got back home, then gradually fell away overnight. Large centralised power stations simply followed that demand. Now we've got millions of rooftops generating electricity at exactly the same time, which means instead of demand gradually rising through the middle of the day, it collapses because an increasingly larger chunk of it is being generated on people's roofs rather than by the grid. On really sunny days, even here in the UK, wholesale electricity prices can fall dramatically and sometimes even go negative. But then, of course, just as millions of people finish work and go home, solar generation falls away rapidly. It's that so-called duck curve that we've looked at loads of times and that some people still apparently can't see in the chart. So here's a picture of a duck to help. You're welcome. The result is that electricity systems suddenly need enormous amounts of flexible generation capable of filling that evening gap. And for years that role's been largely played by gas, which is precisely why gas has remained so stubbornly difficult to eliminate from electricity systems, even as wind and solar have expanded at extraordinary speed. And I think that's the single biggest insight in the Solar Power Europe report. The authors aren't arguing that solar's become a victim of its own success. They're saying that electricity systems built around 20th century power stations simply weren't designed for 21st century renewable generation. If governments want solar deployments to continue accelerating, they now need to stop thinking only about installing more panels and start investing just as aggressively in transmission networks, battery storage, market reform, smarter electricity tariffs and demand flexibility. In other words, the next phase of the energy transition isn't really about generation at all, it's about integration, which not for the first time brings us to Australia. It's a bit of an annoying paradox really. On the one hand, it's one of the world's largest exporters of coal and liquefied natural gas. But on the other hand, it's home to the highest level of rooftop solar adoption anywhere on Earth. On some mild sunny weekends, rooftop solar has become so successful that it supplies the overwhelming majority of electricity demand in several Australian states. And that creates exactly the problem we've just been talking about, a problem that's now being very rapidly addressed with utility scale and domestic battery energy installations, as we looked at in this recent video. According to Australia's energy market operator, batteries have rapidly evolved from simply storing surplus solar electricity to becoming one of the dominant technologies shaping wholesale electricity markets. During the first quarter of this year, batteries set wholesale electricity prices in almost 1/3 of all trading intervals across Australia's national electricity market. Instead of expensive gas turbines firing up every evening to meet peak demand, batteries increasingly charge up with abundant cheap solar electricity during the afternoon, then discharge those electrons back into the grid just as everyone arrives home. California has been going through a similar duck curve experience for many years now, as outlined on a regular basis by Dr. Mark Z. Jacobson, Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Stanford University. And now Texas is doing the same thing, on its way to becoming one of, if not the most renewable energy equipped states in the Union. That's probably why this Solar Power Europe report spends so little time talking about solar panels themselves and so much time on all the other stuff. The frustrating thing is, though, we already know how to build really good and highly efficient transmission lines, we already know how batteries work, we already know how to operate flexible electricity markets thanks to market leaders like Octopus Energy and others. So the technologies are all in place. We just need to hurl ourselves into deploying them at unprecedented speed. That's not the final solution either, of course, as I outlined in a recent video. We've still got other sectors to electrify, like freight transport, heavy industry, data centres and artificial intelligence. The world's going to need far more than the 6 or 7 terawatts of solar capacity predicted in the coming decade or so. We'll need more wind power, massively more storage, more transmission and more demand flexibility, and probably more nuclear in some countries, and almost certainly more hydropower and geothermal energy where geography allows. The climate emergency, plus appalling deadly urban air pollution, were the main drivers of solar power investment, especially in China. But the forces that finish the job will be energy security, economic competitiveness, lower electricity prices, and greater resilience. Plus the really quite blindingly obvious fact that once countries have built out these systems, they'll no longer have to keep buying fossil fuels forevermore, will they? It's a very good report, this one, and it's open source as well. I've left a link in the description section below, so you can go and peruse it at your leisure. And of course, if you've got your own views on the issues we've touched on today, then as always, the place to leave your thoughts is in the comments section below. That's it for this week though. A massive thank you to the amazing folks on Patreon, and an extra special thanks to the folks whose names are scrolling up the screen beside me here, all of whom celebrate an anniversary of Patreon support in July. Don't forget you can join them and get involved in all the extra stuff available for as little as $1 a month by visiting patreon.com/justhavathink. Do give us a like and subscribe as well if you enjoyed the video. You can do that absolutely free by clicking down here somewhere. And most importantly of all, thanks very much for watching. Have a great week, and remember to just have a think. See you next week.